Well, hello everybody. Long time no see. I thought we could look at some old classic games. This is Botvinnik, Konstantinopolsky from 1943, and our former world champion Botvinnik goes with e4, and his opponent chooses Caro-Kann defense. We get d4, d5, and then plenty of ways to go from here. This time we get the exchange variation, and then c4, the Panov version, Panov attack version of the exchange. So this is very double-edged, of course. Very likely that we end up in isolated positions, so isolated queen pawn. Usually black doesn't take instantly because white would just get the bishop out here with tempo. So usually we have a little bit of a waiting game going on around here. Black defends the pawn, knight f6, white attacks it, and then many ways to go here. Black chooses the very solid e6, hanging on to this guy here. If white ever takes here, black is going to take back with the knight and ensures the isolated pawn here. Well, white is not interested of doing it too easily either. He has easy development moves like knight f3 here. And then black chooses black could go here, but he chooses this knight bishop e7, kind of a preemptively unpinning the knight. This is super solid way of for black to play, like ready to castle. This is super well covered. Of course, the downside is that the bishop here is kind of locked in, but black's plan is to at some point, hopefully after this guy moves, to capture there. Why we want to wait this move is that we win a tempo there. If we capture instantly, then it can capture back in one move. But the plan is to take here at some point, give white the isolani, and then probably fianchetto the bishop on b7. And there it is actually on a pretty strong diagonal, even though at the moment it looks like a kind of sad boy there. Well, white went bishop g5, and black just castled. So now white could go here again. He's starting to run out of waiting moves here. There is always the option of declining the IQ piece and playing c5. Here, since we have here, it's probably possible. Black could go b5. White has defended the rook, so I think he gets to hold on to this side pretty well. It's still quite shaky with the knight e4 and chops and chop, and it's definitely a little on the shaky side, and there is a lot of tension going around here, and the knight has to go somewhere. It's a possibility. White decides to wait with the rook c1, and then black plays knight c6, and then white finally decides that no, I'm not gonna wait. He could have played them a3 here, waiting move. Probably still like bishop here is fine-ish, and we get some kind of an IQP position. But often c5 is played after this knight jumps here. It's some kind of at least a potential target at some point to bother a little bit. And well, of course the knight also does support black's counterplay here with e5. Here black plays knight e4. So white has not castled. The bishop is still undecided. He starts to cause trouble in the center here. Principled play. White took the bishop. Queen takes. And then white is not really interested about taking here when things get really messy with the pawn landing here, hitting our knight, and still we haven't done anything about this, and we have to move the knight. So here white preemptively puts the bishop here, anticipating that maybe the file will open up, and then it's more unlikely to be a check when with the bishop here. E5 is definitely coming. Here black played bishop d7. He could have gone with rook d8, like supporting this pawn after we get rid of this guy here, and then we can cause some trouble with the bulldozing this guy down the board. If white instances plays castles e5, then things go, I don't know who takes here, but we take here. If white takes with the pawn to stop this, then kind of weak. Not that this is not the strongest guy in the world either, but and if he takes with the rook to kind of keep the pawn structure a little more solid, then the d4 tile here starts to cause some trouble here. I don't know, rook here, probably takes here. But this would have been a way to go. At least a different kind of a game. Black decides to complete their development. The bishop is not the prettiest piece in here, but at least the rooks are connected. It's about equal. Still, white's not interested about castles. He wants to play a3 and maybe b4. And black plays f5, which is probably at least an inaccuracy here. Probably better was to play f6, support e5, but also this is a big commitment in a way that it leaves a big hole on e5. And white, being a really good positional player, instantly goes for it. Bishop b5. So we waste another move here. No castles. So here we are definitely riding the good rules of, or the principles of opening play. The king is not casting, but we want to trade here, kill the defender of this square and plunk a knight there, and then we seem to be pretty solid. Well, black, being also a great player, is not gonna wait until he ends up in some kind of a passive position and instantly challenges the knight here that is going here. With the idea that, well, what happened in the game 2 is that when white takes here, we don't take back, but do an in-betweener here with check. Important. Get rid of this guy jumping here, and then we capture back. Either way, in the game black took with the b-pawn, probably opens some avenues of attack on the b-file. Well, white tried to contain the e5 here, and black is also up to the challenge and realizes that he doesn't want to end up in a passive position with the weak bishop, and he needs to play e5. Well, the bishop is gonna still be struggling with the pawns here and here, even if we get rid of this, but at least it's one target less in your position. Well, white castles and black instantly plays e5. Well, chop, 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 and rook takes. So bishop is a bit limited. Black has the e-file for now. White plays really good positional move again, f4, bang. Well, it's a tempo on the rook, but more importantly, fixing this guy in place so the bishop stays limited here. Again, black went here. They could try to go here, but then king f2 and here probably everything gets traded off, and then, well, the pawn is a little too far in white's camp and probably will fall to some kind of a king f3, rook e1, and then Black is probably busted. D4 neither doesn't really work because we just attack the pawn and you can't take the knight without dropping the rook and you can't keep the pawn covered, so this is just losing also. So black goes backwards. White says, let's trade a pair of rooks. And black's okay with that. White says chop, chop, and then comes king f2. Ready to challenge the e-file, but mostly just covering any entries with the rook. Not that it was going anywhere really fast anyways. Well, black brings his king closer to the center, but he still is struggling with the bishop here. Instantly going here is probably not ideal with the leaving this square unguarded. We cannot reach there. Not only dropping this, but this is covered and it's not possible yet to reach here with the knight, which is probably the ideal square for the knight, but we have to fix the problems with the rook first. Rook e1, in a game they played rook d1. Rook e1, trying to trade the rooks is too early. So our king gets way too far away here. Black has a nice move here, d4. You sack the pawn temporarily, but you then get it back. And then your king is much more active and this gets kicked out away somewhere and you pop this guy here and the bishop is no longer as sad as it was. Of course this is nice outpost, but the active king is gonna probably counter it and the bishop is gonna also have its say here. This is would have been about equal. So white first fixes the pawn in place. Rook's going there, he's not getting anywhere here. Aiming there. Rook d2. And then we are maybe ready to trade the rooks and then we get to take with the knight and reach there, and that would be positionally winning. Black's playing for g5 here. White says let's trade and black says oh no. There's something on the b file. Alright, so white decides to bring the king to d4 instead. Here it's ready to march up the board if needed. I mean, it's almost instant threat. Guess at them if white goes there, maybe king can still block our entry here. But it's definitely active place now. This guy comes here, blocks the e5. Also everything is covered here. White plays knight a2. Maybe aiming here. Black gets out of there so he doesn't get stuck with the rook. Not that it was easy to win it in a way, even if he gets stuck. And of course you had a5 to hit the knight, but he decides to go away. And then white unleashes their pawns. I guess we also had an idea, not only this one, but going here and kicking the blockading rook out of the way here and getting the b4 going. And also maybe afterwards we could sneak the knight towards the e5, possibly. Well, b4. Here black goes for a kingside play with g5. He could have tried a5 too, but white can probably take it and play in some order. Knight c3 and a4, and it's a passed pawn anyways. It's blocked at the moment, but on the other hand also the rook's kind of stuck guarding it, and then maybe we could do something with ours. So black doesn't want to give white a passed pawn yet. He's trying to cause some weaknesses on this side and infiltrate with the rook. White says g3, at least keep the pawn here so the bishop keeps being bad. chop. And then first we fix this side a little bit. Could have probably gone rook g8 instantly. Might improve the knight. And then this guy goes here. If black tries to hold on here, we could probably at some point bring the rook here, or maybe even bring the knight there to blockade the file and then try to push the pawns, but it's pretty well covered at the moment. So not easy to get in. This makes it a little more easy. Rook's planning of going here, causing trouble. Well, white instantly sees the opportunity and starts to push the pawns. Rook goes there, and white calmly just defends the pawn. It's planning of b4, b5, and then chop, 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 and chop, and well, eventually we end up with passed c pawn, which is very hard to stop. Black played in a game bishop e2, e6. Can try this one, but the pawns just push anyways. Pop, 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 check. If king there, we have a check and can even take here if black plays this way. And if it goes there, can probably swing the rook to this side, and the king is not happily placed here. Let's say tries to give some checks from behind. We just push give a check, and then our pawn is ready to move. Black can throw in some checks, but king just sidesteps them to d6, and then it's supporting the c7 even. And this is a lot slower, and we can always put the rook behind it at any point. Not good, not good at all. Well, in a game black went bishop e6. Well, white pushed anyways. Defended this, but we took the other one, and now we have still a passed pawn here. Black's trying to give some checks from the behind, and white is just calmly defending them. No checks for you. Not only it's blocking the rook getting behind the pawn, but it's blocking, defending the checks from d1. So rook f7 or king f7, rook b2, and rook f1, trying to cause some problems here. And white calmly just defends it anyways, and king is ready to go here. Knight is covering this, that. It's defended, and it's also kind of covering some checks on e file if we go here. And of course the pawn is also unleashed. Oh yeah, king f7 was kind of a mysterious move, but point of course was that it's out of check earlier. So if white takes, there's this skewer here. So it explains the king f7. Alright, so rook e1, king invades. Maybe even use the d-pawn as an umbrella for the checks. Well, black gives it away, and white says thank you. I can win later on. I don't have to hurry and give any counterplay with possible d3s. Alright, so here black decides that it looks miserable. They come up with a plan of running the king there and trying to promote the h-pawn. It seems incredibly slow and hopeless. White plays knight c3, again covering this, covering the c file. And then he decides to just chop the rooks away. This guy is going, but we hit the bishop with tempo. And then knight d4. Now if we go here, we can probably take this, and well, obviously if you take, then this is too fast. Also we can win this pawn here too, so everything fails. But basically you'd have to do something with this, and well, eventually Now there is 2 passed pawns. The bishop can't cover both. And this is still ages to go from promoting. So after knight d4, black played h5 and white showed some technique or tactics and took the pawn anyways, even though it's defended. Of course, if chop h3 and you can't keep the bishop defended, so let's say here, this is just gonna be a hopeless race. We can even say stop. Alright, so in a game, black played bishop f7, d7, but problem of course here is that there's now 2 passed pawns. We're also hitting these guys. So if black goes there, we probably can take this first. But okay, black went there, white just pushed the pawn. They went back, and white gave a check, pushing the king to the flank there. And well, they didn't get there. White still has the 2 passed pawns. Here, well, actually I think here black resigned. So that was a pretty nifty game. Probably not free of errors, but pretty well played, positional, and a little bit tactical exercise. Anyways, thanks for watching, and until next time, ciao ciao.